Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Countess of Rudolstadt by George Sand, translated by Francis G. Shaw. Letter from Philon. Footnote. Probably the celebrated Baron de Nig, known under the name of Philon in the order of the Illuminates. To Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 1. Carried in his train like the satellites of a royal star, we followed Spartacus. Footnote. It is known that this was Adam Weishoff's nom de guerre. Can it be really he who is here referred to? Every circumstance leads us to believe it. Through the precipitous paths and under the most silent shadows of the Burma Wald. Oh, my friend, why were you not there? You would have forgotten to gather pebbles in the silvery bed of the torrents, to question by turns the veins and the bones of a mysterious progenitor. Terra parens. The burning words of our master gave us wings. We passed ravines and peaks without counting our steps, without looking at the abysses which lay at our feet, without seeking in the horizon the distant resting place in which we were to find repose at evening. Never had Spartacus appeared to us more great or more imbued with all-powerful truth. The beauties of nature acted upon his imagination, like those of a great poem, and through the lightnings of his enthusiasm never does his spirit of wise analysis and ingenious combination abandon him. He explains heaven and the stars, the earth and the seas, with the same clearness, the same order, which preside over his dissertations upon law and the dry matters of this world. But how great does his soul become when, alone and free with his chosen disciples, under the azure of the constellated heavens, or in face of the dawn reddened by the fires, precursors of the sun, he clears time and space to embrace at one glance the human race in its aggregate and details, to penetrate the fragile destiny of empires in the imposing future of the nations. You have heard in his chair, this young man of clear speech. Why have you not seen and heard upon the mountain this man whose wisdom surpasses his years, and who seems to have lived among men since the infancy of the world? Arrived at the frontier, we saluted the soil which had seen the exploits of the great Siska, and we inclined ourselves still lower before the gulfs which had served as tombs to the martyrs of ancient national liberty. They were resolved to separate in order to direct our researches and inquiries upon all points at once. Cato, footnote, doubtless Xavier Swack, who was in all a counselor and was exiled for having been one of the principal chiefs of Illuminism, took the road towards the northeast. Celis, footnote, Bader, who was physician to the Electress Dowager Illumine. Towards the southeast, Ajax, footnote, Massenhausen, counselor at Munich Illumine. Followed the transversal direction from east to west, and the general rendezvous was at Pilsen. Spartacus kept me with him, and resolved to trust to chance, depending, as he said, upon fortune, upon a certain secret inspiration which would guide us. I was somewhat astonished at this abandonment of calculation and reasoning. It seemed to me contrary to his methodical habits. Philon, said he to me when we were alone, I do indeed believe that men like ourselves are the ministers of providence here below. But do you think I believe that maternal providence by which we feel, will, and act to be inert and disdainful? I have remarked that you are more favored by it than I am. Your designs almost always succeed. Forward, then. I follow you, and have faith in your second sight, that mysterious clearness which our ancestors in Illuminism, the pious fanatics of the past, so artlessly invoked. It really seemed as if the master had prophesied. Before the close of the second day, we found the object of our search, and this was the manner in which I was the instrument of destiny. We had reached the border of the forest, and the road forked before us. One branch was lost as it ran towards the low grounds. The other followed the gentle slope of the mountain. Which shall we take? Said Spartacus to me, seating himself upon a rocky fragment. I see on this side cultivated fields, meadows, mean cabins. We were told that he is poor. He must live with the poor. Let us go and inquire respecting him of the humble herdsman of the valley. No, master, replied I, pointing to the side hill path. I see on my right craggy eminences and the crumbling walls of an ancient manor house. We were told that he is a poet, and he must love ruins and solitude. Also, replied Spartacus, smiling, I see Vesper rising, white as a pearl, in the still rose-colored sky, above the ruins of the old domain. We are the shepherds who seek a prophet, and the miraculous star goes before us. We soon reached the ruins. They were the remains of an imposing edifice, built at different epochs, but the vestiges of the time of the Emperor Charles lay beside those of the feudal ages. It was not centuries. It was the hand of man that had recently presided over this devastation. It was still broad daylight when we climbed the bank of a dry ditch and penetrated beneath a rusty and motionless portcullis. The first object we encountered, seated upon the ruins at the entrance of the courtyard, was an old man covered with strange rags, and more like a man of times past than a contemporary. His beard, of the color of yellow ivory, fell upon his chest, and his bald head shone like the surface of a lake in the last rays of the sun. Spartacus felt a thrill, and hastily approaching him, asked of him the name of the chateau. The old man appeared not to hear us. He stared at us with glassy eyes which seemed not to see. We asked his name. He did not answer. His physiognomy betokened a dreamy indifference. Still, his Socratic features did not announce the brutishness of idiotism. He had in his ugliness that certain beauty which proceeds from a pure and serene soul. Spartacus placed a piece of money in his hand. He carried it close to his eyes and let it fall without appearing to understand its use. Is it possible, said I to the master, that an old man, totally deprived of the use of his senses and of his reason, can be thus abandoned far from any habitation, in the depths of the mountains, without a guide, without a dog to lead him and to beg in his stead? Let us carry him away and conduct him to some resting place, replied Spartacus. But when we undertook to raise him in order to see if he could support himself on his legs, he made a sign to us not to trouble him, by placing a finger on his lips and pointing with his other hand to the extremity of the court. Our eyes were directed to that side. We saw no one there, but immediately our ears were saluted by the sounds of a violin of extraordinary power and justness. Never have I heard any master give to his bow so penetrating and so broad a vibration, and bring into so intimate a connection the chords of the soul and of the instrument. The music was simple and sublime. It resembled nothing I have heard in our concerts and theaters. It carried to the heart an emotion which was at once pious and warlike. We fell, the master and myself, into a kind of transport, and said to each other by our looks that here was something grand and mysterious. Those of the old man had assumed a sort of vague brilliancy, which resembled that of ecstasy. A smile of beatitude half opened his pale lips and showed clearly that he was neither deaf nor insensible. All was silence after a short and admirable melody, and soon we saw issue from the chapel opposite to us a man of mature years, whose exterior filled us with emotion and respect. The beauty of his austere visage and the noble proportions of his form contrasted with the deformed limbs and the savage features of the old man, whom Spartacus compared to a converted and baptized faun. The violin player walked straight towards us, his instrument under his arm, and his bow passed through his leather girdle. Broad pantaloons of coarse cloth, sandals which resembled ancient buskins, and a frock of sheepskin like that worn by our peasants of the Danube, gave him the appearance of a herdsman or a laborer. But his white and fine hands did not indicate a man devoted to the labors of the soil. They were the hands of an artist, while the neatness of his dress and the stateliness of his demeanor seemed to protest against his poverty, and to be unwilling to submit to its hideous and degrading consequences. The master was struck by the aspect of this man. He clasped my hand, and I felt his own tremble. "It is he," said he to me. I did not know that he was a musician, but I recognize his face because I have seen it in my dreams. The violin player advanced towards us without testifying either embarrassment or surprise. He returned with a benevolent dignity the salutations we addressed to him, and approaching the old man, "Come, Zdenko," said he to him, "I am going. Support yourself upon your friend." The old man made an effort. The musician raised him in his arms, and bending under him, as if to serve him for a staff, he guided his tottering steps, accommodating his own walk to his. There was, in this filial care, in this patience of a noble and handsome man, still agile and vigorous, who drew himself along under the weight of an old man in rags, something more touching, if possible, than the solicitude of a young mother measuring her walk by the first uncertain steps of her child. I saw the master's eyes fill with tears, and I also was agitated. Contemplating by turns our Spartacus, that man of genius and of future, and this unknown in whom I felt the same greatness buried in the shadows of the past. Resolved to follow and to question him, but not wishing to distract him from the pious care he had assumed, we walked at a short distance behind him. He directed his steps towards the chapel whence he had issued, and when he had entered, he stopped and appeared to contemplate the ruined tombs which the briars and moss had invaded. The old man knelt down, and when he rose, his friend kissed one of the tombs and began to depart with him. It was then only that he perceived us near him, and he appeared to experience some surprise, but no distrust was depicted in his glance, at once brilliant and placid like that of a child. This man appeared nevertheless to have counted more than half a century, and his thick gray hair waving around his face increased the brilliancy of his large black eyes. His mouth had an indefinable expression of strength and simplicity. You would have said that he had two souls, one all of enthusiasm for celestial things, one all of benevolence for men here below. We were seeking for a pretext to address him, when, placing himself at once in association of ideas with us, with a naivete of extraordinary expansion, "You have seen me kiss this marble," said he to us, "and this old man has prostrated himself upon these tombs. Do not consider these as acts of idolatry. We kiss the garment of a saint, as we carry on our bosom the pledge of love and of friendship. The remains of the dead are only a worn-out garment. We cannot tread it under our feet with indifference. We guard it with respect, and we separate ourselves from it with regret. O my father, O my well-beloved relatives, I know well that you are not here, and that these inscriptions lie when they say, 'Here rest the Rudolstadts.' The Rudolstadts are all erect, all living and acting in the world according to the will of God. Under these marbles there are only bones, forms in which life was manifested, and which it has abandoned to assume other forms. Blessed be the ashes of our forefathers. Blessed be the grass and ivy which crown them. Blessed be the soil and stones which protect them. But blessed above all be the living God who says to the dead, Rise and re-enter my fruitful bosom in which nothing dies, in which all is renewed and is purified. Liverani or Ziska Trismegistus, is it you whom I find here upon the tombs of your ancestors? Cried Spartacus, enlightened by a celestial certainty. Neither Liverani nor Trismegistus, nor even Jean Ziska, replied the unknown. Phantoms disturbed my ignorant youth, but the divine light has absorbed them, and the name of my forefathers is effaced from my memory. My name is man, and I am nothing more than any other man. Your words are profound, but they indicate distrust, returned the master. Trust to this sign. Do you not recognize it? At the same time, Spartacus made to him the Masonic signs of the high grades. I have forgotten that language, replied the unknown. I do not despise it, but it has become useless to me. Brother, do not insult me by supposing that I distrust you. Your name, yours also, is it not man? Men have never done me any evil, or if they have, I know it no longer. It was therefore a very limited evil in comparison with the infinite good they can do to each other, and for which I feel obliged to them in anticipation. Is it possible, O man of good, cried Spartacus, that you count time as nothing in your notion and in your sentiment of life? Time does not exist, and if men meditated more upon the divine essence, they would count centuries and years no more than I do. What is to him who partakes the nature of God so far as to be eternal, so far that he has always lived and will never cease to live? A little more or less of sand at the bottom of the clepsydra? The hand which turns the glass may hasten or become stiff. That which supplies the sand will never stop. You mean to say that man may forget to count and measure time, but that life always flows abundant and fruitful from the bosom of God? Is that your thought? You have understood me, young man, but I have a still finer demonstration of the great mysteries. The mysteries? Yes, I have come very far to question and to learn of you. Listen, then, said the unknown, obliging the old man, who obeyed him with the confidence of a little child, to seat himself upon a stone. This place inspires me peculiarly, and it is here, by the last fires of the sun and the first white rays of the moon, that I wish to raise your soul to the knowledge of the most sublime truths. We palpitated with joy at the idea of having at last found, after 2 years of searchings and inquiries, this magus of our religion, this philosopher at once metaphysician and organizer, who was to confide to us the thread of Ariadne and enable us to find the issue of past ideas and things. But the unknown, seizing his violin, began to play with energy. His powerful bow made the plants quiver like the evening wind, and the ruins to resound like the human voice. His music had a peculiar character of religious enthusiasm, of ancient simplicity and attractive fervor. The themes were of a majestic amplitude in their energetic brevity. Nothing in that unknown music announced languor and reverie. It was like warlike hymns, and caused to pass before our eyes triumphant armies, bearing banners, palms, and the mysterious signs of a new religion. I saw the immensity of the nations united under one standard. No tumult in their ranks, a fever without delirium, an impetuous transport without anger. Human activity in all its splendor, victory in all its clemency, and faith in all its sublime expansion. "That is magnificent," cried I, when he had played with fervor 5 or 6 of those admirable themes. "It is the Te Deum of humanity, rejuvenated and reconciled, returning thanks to the God of all religions, to the light of all men." "You have understood me, my son," said the musician, wiping away the sweat and the tears which bathed his face, "and you see that time has but one voice to proclaim the truth. Look at that old man. He has understood as well as you, and has become 30 years younger." We looked at the old man, whom we had forgotten. He was erect. He walked with ease and beat the ground in time with his foot, as if he wished to leap and bound like a youth. The music had worked a miracle upon him. He descended the hill with us without wishing to support himself on any one. When his walk became slower, the musician said to him, "Zdenko, do you wish me to play again for you the march of Procops the Great, or the benediction of the banner of the Orobites?" But the old man made a sign that he still had strength, as if he feared to abuse the celestial remedy and wear out the inspiration of his friend. We directed our steps towards the hamlet we had left on the right, at the bottom of the valley, when we took the road to the ruins. As we went on, Spartacus interrogated the unknown. "You have caused us to hear incomparable melodies," said he to him, "and I have understood that, by this brilliant prelude, you wish to dispose our senses to the enthusiasm which fills you to overflowing. You wish to exalt yourself, like the Pythonesses and the prophets of old, in order that you might pronounce your oracles, armed with all the power of inspiration, and filled with the Spirit of the Lord. Speak now, then. The air is calm, the path is easy, the moon lights our steps. All nature seems plunged in concentration to listen to you, and our hearts call for your revelations. Our vain science, our proud reason, will be humbled before your burning words. Speak, the moment has come." But the unknown refused to explain himself. "What could I say to you that I have not just said, in a more beautiful language? Is it my fault if you have not understood me? You think that I wish to speak to your senses, and it was my soul that spoke to you. What do I say? It was the soul of the whole of humanity that spoke to you through mine. I was truly inspired then. Now I am no longer so. I have need of rest. You would experience the same need had you received all that I wished to make pass from my being into yours." It was impossible for Spartacus to obtain anything else that evening. When we had reached the first huts, "Friends," said the unknown to us, "do not follow me any longer, but come and see me again tomorrow. You may knock at the first door. You will be well received everywhere here, if you understand the language of the country." It was not necessary for us to display the little money with which we were provided. The hospitality of the Bohemian peasant is worthy of ancient times. We were received with a calm obligingness, and soon with an affectionate cordiality, when we were heard to speak the slave language without difficulty. The people here still distrust everyone who approaches them with German words in his mouth. We soon learned that we were at the foot of the mountain and of the castle of the giants, and from the name might have believed ourselves transported by enchantment into the great northern chain of the Carpathians. But we were informed that one of the ancestors of the Podobrats had thus baptized his domain in consequence of a vow he had made in the Riesenberg. They also related to us how the descendants of Podobrat had changed their own name after the disasters of the 30 Years' War to that of Rudolstadt. Persecution went so far in those days as even to Germanize the names of cities, estates, families, and individuals. All these traditions are still living in the heart of the Bohemian peasant. Thus, the mysterious Trismegistus, whom we sought, is very certainly the same Albert Podebrad who was buried alive 25 years ago, and who, rescued from the tomb, it was never known by what miracle, disappeared for a long time, and was persecuted and imprisoned 10 or 15 years later as a cheat, impostor, and especially as a Freemason and Rosicrucian. He is indeed that famous Count de Rudolstadt, whose strange trial was concealed with so much care, and whose identity could never be determined. Friend, have confidence, then, in the inspirations of the Master. You tremble to see us. From vague and incomplete revelations, run in search of a man who might be, like so many of the illuminates of the preceding formation, an impudent chevalier d'industry, or a ridiculous adventurer. The Master had divined rightly, from some scattered memoranda, from some mysterious writings of this strange personage, he had perceived a man of intelligence and of truth, a precious guardian of the sacred fire and of the healthful traditions of anterior Illuminism, an adept of the ancient secret, a doctor of the new interpretation. We have found him, and we know more now of the history of Masonry, of the famous Invisibles, whose labors and even whose existence we doubted, of the ancient and modern mysteries, than we have ever learned by seeking to decipher lost hieroglyphics, or by consulting ancient adepts, worn by persecution and debased by fear. We have at last found a man, and we return to you with that sacred fire, which formerly made of a statue of clay an intelligent being, a new god, the rival of the savage and stupid gods of ancient times. Our master is the Prometheus. Trismegistus had the flame in his heart, and we have derived enough of it from him to initiate you all into a new life. The recitals of our good host kept us long awake around the rustic hearth. They had not cared for the sentences and legal attestations which declared Albert de Rudolstadt to have forfeited, by an attack of catalepsy, his name and his rights. The love they bore his memory, their hatred of the foreigners, those Austrian spoilers who, after having procured the condemnation of the true heir, came to divide his estate and his chateau. The shameful plunder of that great fortune, of which Albert would have made so noble a use, and especially the hammer of the demolisher destroying that ancient seigneurial abode, in order to sell the materials at a low price, as certain animals, destructive and profaning by nature, must needs pollute and injure the prey they cannot carry away. This was quite enough to cause the peasants of the Bermerwald to prefer a poetically miraculous truth to the reasonable and odious assertions of the conquerors. 25 years have passed since the disappearance of Albert Podebrad, and no one here has been willing to believe in his death, although the German gazettes have published it in confirmation of an unjust sentence, although the whole aristocracy of the court of Vienna has laughed with contempt and pity at hearing the story of a madman who considered himself, in good faith, a resuscitated dead man. And now Albert de Rudolstadt has been a week in these mountains, and goes to pray and to sing every evening under the ruins of the chateau of his fathers. And now also, during this week, all the men old enough to have seen him when young recognize him under his gray hairs and prostrate themselves before him as before their true master and their former friend. There is something admirable in this recollection and in the love which these people bear to him. Nothing in our corrupted world can give an idea of the pure morals and the noble sentiments we have met with here. Spartacus is penetrated with respect, and he is the more struck with them, because a little persecution we experienced from these peasants confirmed our opinion of their fidelity to misfortune and gratitude. This is what happened when, at break of day, we wished to leave the hut In order to inquire for the violin player, we found a picket of improvised infantry guarding all the exits from our resting place. "Forgive us," said the head of the family to me, calmly, "for having called all our relatives and friends with their flails and their sickles to keep you here against your will. You shall be free this evening." And when we expressed surprise at this violence, "If you are honest people," resumed our host, with a grave air, "if you comprehend friendship and devotedness, you will not be angry with us. If, on the contrary, you are cheats and spies sent here to persecute and carry off our Podebrat, we will not suffer it, and we will not permit you to go out until he shall be very far out of reach of your attempts." We understood that distrust had come, in the night, to these honest people, at first so expansive with us, and we could not but admire their solicitude. But the master was in despair of losing sight of the Hierophant, whom we had come to seek with so much trouble and so few chances of success. He wrote to Trismegistus in the Masonic cipher, telling him his name, his position, informing him of our intentions, and invoking his loyalty in order to free us from the distrust of the peasants. A few moments after this letter had been carried to the neighboring hut, we saw coming a woman, before whom the peasants opened with respect their phalanx bristling with rustic arms. We heard them murmur, "The Zingara, the Zingara of consolation." And soon that woman entered the hut with us, and closing the doors behind her, began to interrogate us by the signs and formulas of the Scotch masonry, with a scrupulous severity. We were much surprised at seeing a woman initiated into those mysteries, which no other has ever possessed, so far as I know, and the imposing manner, the scrutinizing look of this one inspired us with a certain respect, in spite of the very evidently Zingaro costume which she wore with the ease given by habit. Her striped petticoat, her broad cloak of reddish-brown cloth thrown over her shoulder like antique drapery, her tresses black as night, parted on her brow, and fastened back with a blue woolen band, her large eyes full of fire, her teeth white as ivory, her tanned but fine skin, her little feet and her delicate hands, and, to complete the portrait, a very handsome guitar slung under her cloak. Everything in her person and costume indicated, at first sight, the type and the profession of a Zingara. As she was very neat, and her manners were full of calmness and dignity, we thought her the queen of her camp. But when she informed us that she was the wife of Trismegistus, we looked at her with more interest and attention. She is no longer young, and yet one could not say if she were a person of 40, worn by fatigue, or one of 50, remarkably preserved. She is still handsome, and her elegant and light form has such noble attitudes, so pure a grace, that on seeing her walk you would take her for a young girl. When the first severity of her features was softened, we were penetrated by degrees with the charm that is in her. Her look is angelic, and the sound of her voice moves your heart like a celestial melody. Whoever this woman may be, the legitimate wife of the philosopher, or a generous adventuress, attached to his steps in consequence of an ardent passion, it is impossible, on looking at her and hearing her speak, to think that any vice, any degrading instincts have ever soiled a being so calm, so frank, and so good. We were at first frightened at finding our sage debased by vulgar ties. It required but a short time for us to discover that, in the ranks of true nobility, that of the heart and understanding, he had met a poetic lover, a soul sister of his own, to pass with him through the storms of life. "Forgive my fears and my mistrust," said she when we had replied to her questions. "We have been persecuted. We have suffered much. Thanks to heaven, my friend has lost the recollection of his misfortunes. Nothing can now trouble him or make him suffer more. But I, whom God has placed by his side to preserve him, I must be anxious for him and watch over him. Your countenances and the accent of your voices reassure me still more than those signs and words which we have just exchanged, for the mysteries have been strangely abused, and there have been as many false brothers as false doctors. We should be authorized by human prudence never again to believe in anything or anybody. But may God preserve us from that extreme of selfishness and impiety. The family of the faithful is dispersed, it is true. There is no longer any temple in which to commune in spirit and in truth. The adepts have lost the meaning of the mysteries. The letter has killed the spirit. The divine art is misunderstood and profaned among men. But what matters it, if faith persists in some few? What matters it, if the word of life remains in deposit in some sanctuary? It will yet come forth. It will yet spread abroad through the world, and the temple will perhaps be rebuilt by the faith of the Canaanitish woman and the widow's mite. We come expressly to seek for that word of life, replied the master. It is pronounced in all the sanctuaries, and it is true that it is no longer understood. We have commented upon it with ardor. We have borne it in us with perseverance, and after years of labor and meditation, we have thought we had found the true interpretation. This is why we've come to ask of your husband the sanction of our faith or the rectification of our error. Let us speak with him. Obtain for us that he listen to and answer us. That will not depend upon me, replied the Zingara, and upon himself still less. Trismegistus is not always inspired, although he lives entirely under the charm of poetical illusions. Music is his habitual manifestation. His metaphysical ideas are rarely lucid enough to abstract themselves from the emotions of exalted feeling. At this moment, he could tell you nothing satisfactory. His words are always clear to me, but would be obscure to you who are not accustomed to them. I must needs give you a warning. According to men, blinded by their cold reason, Trismegistus is insane. And while the poetic people humbly offer the gifts of hospitality to the sublime virtuoso who has affected and transported them, the vulgar world throws the arms of pity to the vagabond rhapsodist who carries his inspiration through the cities. But I have taught our children that they must not pick up those alms, or that they must do so only for the infirm beggar who passes beside us, and to whom heaven has not granted genius to move and to persuade men. As for ourselves, we have no need of the money of the rich. We do not beg. Alms debase him who receives and harden him who gives. All that is not exchange must disappear from the society of the future. In the meanwhile, God permits us, my husband and myself, to practice this life of exchange and thus to enter into the ideal. We carry ardent enthusiasm to souls susceptible of feeling the one and inhaling the other. We receive the religious hospitality of the poor man. We share his modest abode, his frugal repast, and when we have need of a coarse garment, we earn it by remaining some weeks and giving lessons in music to the family. When we pass before the proud dwelling of the chatelaine, as he is our brother as well as the herdsman, the laborer and the artisan, we sing under his window and depart without expecting any pay. We consider him an unfortunate who can make no exchange with us, and it is we, then, who give alms to him. In fine, we have realized the artist's life as we understand it, for God has made us artists, and it is our duty to employ his gifts. Everywhere we have friends and brothers in the lowest ranks of that society, which would think itself degraded by asking of us our secret to be honest and free. Each day we make new disciples of the art, and when our strength shall be exhausted, when we shall no longer be able to feed and carry our children, They will carry us in their turn, and we shall be fed and consoled by them. If our children should fail us, be drawn far away from us by different vocations, we shall do like our old Zdenko, whom you saw yesterday, and who, after having charmed all the peasants of the country for 40 years, with his legends and his songs, is received and nursed by them in his last days as a friend and a venerable master. With simple tastes and frugal habits, the love of travel, the health which is given by a life conformable to nature, with the enthusiasm of poetry, the absence of bad passions, and especially with faith in the future destiny of the world, think you that one can be crazy to live as we do? Still, Trismegistus may perhaps appear to you deranged by enthusiasm, as he formerly appeared to me deranged by sorrow. But by following him a little, you will perhaps recognize that it is the insanity of men and the error of institutions which make men of genius and originality appear insane. Now come with us, and journey as we do the whole day if necessary. There will perhaps be an hour in which Trismegistus will be in the mood to speak of something besides music. You must not press him. It will come of itself at a given moment. Chance may awaken his old ideas. We depart in an hour. Our presence here may bring new dangers upon the head of my husband. Anywhere else we should not risk being recognized after so many years of exile. We are going to Vienna by the chain of the Burma Wald and the course of the Danube. It is a journey which I formerly made and which I shall recommence with pleasure. We are going to see 2 of our children, the eldest, whom some friends in easy circumstances have wished to keep for the purpose of instructing. For all are not born to be artists, and each should walk in life by the path which Providence has marked out for him. Such are the explanations which this strange woman, urged by our questions and often interrupted by our objections, gave to us of the kind of life she had adopted in conformity with the tastes and ideas of her husband. We accepted with joy the offer she made, and followed her. When we left the hut with her, the civic guide which had been formed to stop us opened its ranks to let us pass. "Come, my children," cried the Zingara to them, in her full and harmonious voice. "Your friend awaits you under the lindens. This is the most beautiful moment of the day, and we will have the morning prayer in music. Trust in these 2 friends," added she, designating us by her beautiful and naturally theatrical gesture. "They are ours and wish us only good." The peasants rushed forward after us, shouting and singing. As we walked, the Zingara informed us that she and her family intended to leave the hamlet that morning. "It must not be mentioned," added she. "Such a separation would occasion too many tears, for we have many friends here. But we are not safe in this place. Some old enemy might pass and recognize Albert of Rudolstadt under the Bohemian costume." We reached the square of the hamlet, a green lawn, surrounded by enormous lindens which permitted to appear, between the ancient trunks, humble cottages and capricious paths traced and worn by the feet of flocks. This place seemed to us enchanted, seen by the earliest rays of the oblique sun, which caused the emerald carpet of the fields to glisten, while the silvery vapors of the morning folded themselves upon the sides of the neighboring mountains. The shady places seemed to have retained some of the bluish clearness of the night, while the tops of the trees were tinged with gold and purple. Everything was pure and distinct. Everything appeared to us fresh and young. Even the ancient lindens, the roofs covered with moss, and the old men with white beards who came smiling out of their huts. In the midst of the open space, where a small thread of crystal water flowed, dividing itself and crossing under the feet, we saw Trismegistus, surrounded by his children, 2 charming little girls and a boy of 15, handsome as the Endymion of the sculptors and the poets. "This is Wanda," said the Zingara to us, as she presented to us the elder of her daughters, "and the younger is called Wenceslawa. As to our son, he has received the beloved name of his father's best friend. He is called Zdenko. Old Zdenko has a marked preference for him. You see that he holds my Wenceslaw between his legs and the other on his knees. But he does not think of them. His eyes are fixed on my son, as if he could not be satisfied with the sight of him. We looked at the old man. 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks, and his bony face, furrowed with wrinkles, had an expression of beatitude and ecstasy as he contemplated the young man, this last shoot of the Rudolstadts, who bore his slave's name with joy, and who stood erect beside him, one hand in his. I could have wished to paint this group, and Trismegistus near them, gazing at them by turns with an affectionate air, while he tuned his violin and tried his bow. "It is you, friends," said he, replying cordially to our respectful salutations. "My wife, then, has been to seek you. She has done well. I have some good things to say today, and I shall be happy to have you hear them." He then played the violin with even more breadth and majesty than the evening before. At least such was our impression, become stronger and more delicious by our contact with that rustic assembly, which thrilled with pleasure and enthusiasm at hearing the ancient ballads of the fatherland and the sacred hymns of former liberty. Emotion displayed itself differently upon those manly faces. Some, like Zdenko, transported into the vision of the past, held in their breath, and seemed impregnated with poetry, like the thirsty plant which greedily drinks in the drops of a beneficent rain. Others, carried away by a holy fury at thought of the evils of the present, clenched their fists, and threatening invisible enemies seemed to call heaven to witness their degraded dignity, their insulted virtue. There were sobs and groans, frenzied applauses, and cries of delirium. "Friends," said Albert to us as he concluded, "look at those simple men. They have perfectly understood what I wish to say to them. They do not ask of me, as you did yesterday, the meaning of my prophecies." "Still you have spoken to them only of the past," said Spartacus, greedy of his words. "The past, the future, the present, what vain subtleties," returned Trismegistus, smiling. "Does not man carry all 3 of them in his heart, and is not his existence entire within that triple medium? But since you absolutely require words to depict ideas, listen to my son. He will sing to you a canticle, of which his mother has made the music, and myself the verses." The beautiful youth advanced, with a calm and modest air, into the midst of the circle. You could see that his mother, without thinking that she flattered a weakness, had said to herself that, by right and perhaps also from duty, it was necessary to respect and acknowledge the beauty of the artist. She dresses him with a certain elegance. His superb locks are combed with care, and the stuffs of his rustic suit are of a brighter color and a lighter web than those of the rest of the family. He took off his cap, saluted his audience with a kiss sent collectively from the tips of his fingers, to which 100 kisses, sent in the same manner, replied with fervor. And after his mother had preluded on her guitar with peculiar genius, derived from southern climes, he began to sing, accompanied by her, the following words, which I translate for you from the Slave, and the admirable music of which they were also willing I should note down. "The good goddess of poverty," a ballad. Paths sanded with gold, verdant heaths, ravines loved by the chamois, great mountains crowned with stars, wandering torrents, impenetrable forest. Let pass the good goddess, the goddess of poverty. Since the world exists, since men were created, she traverses the world. She dwells among men, she travels singing, or she sings working. The goddess, the good goddess of poverty. Some men assembled to curse her. They found her too beautiful and too gay, too nimble and too strong. "Let us tear away her wings," said they. Let us load her with chains. Let us bruise her with blows, that she may suffer, that she may perish, the goddess of poverty. They have chained the good goddess. They have beaten and persecuted her, but they could not debase her. She has taken refuge in the soul of poets, in the soul of peasants, in the soul of artists, in the soul of martyrs, in the soul of saints. The good goddess, the goddess of poverty. She has walked more than the wandering Jew. She has traveled more than the swallow. She is older than the cathedral of Prague, and younger than the egg of the wren. She has multiplied more upon the earth than the strawberries in the Burma Wald. The goddess, the good goddess of poverty. She has had many children, and she has taught them the secret of God. She spoke to the heart of Jesus upon the mountain, to the eyes of Queen Labussa when she became enamored of a laborer, to the spirit of John and Jerome upon the funeral pyre of Constance. She knows more of it than all the doctors and all the bishops, the good goddess of poverty. She always makes the grandest and most beautiful things that are seen upon the earth. It is she who cultivates the fields and prunes the trees. It is she who leads the flocks, singing the most beautiful airs. It is she who sees the day dawn, and who receives the first smile of the sun. The good goddess of poverty. It is she who builds with green boughs the cabin of the woodcutter, and who gives to the poacher the sight of the eagle. It is she who raises the most beautiful children, and who makes the plow and the spade light in the hands of the old man. The good goddess of poverty. It is she who inspires the poet, and who renders the violin, the guitar, and the flute eloquent under the fingers of the wandering artist. It is she who carries him on her light wing from the source of the Moldau to that of the Danube. It is she who crowns his hair with pearls of dew, and who makes the stars shine for him more large and more clear. The goddess, the good goddess of poverty. It is she who instructs the ingenious artisan, and who teaches him to cut stone, to carve marble, to fashion gold and silver, copper and iron. It is she who makes the flax supple and fine as hair under the fingers of the old mother and the young girl. The good goddess of poverty. It is she who holds up the hovels shaken by the storm. It is she who husbands the rosin of the torch and the oil of the lamp. It is she who kneads the bread of the family and who weaves garments for winter and for summer. It is she who feeds and nourishes the world, the good goddess of poverty. It is she who has built the great chateaus and the old cathedrals. It is she who carries the saber and the musket. It is she who makes war and conquests. It is she who collects the dead, who nurses the wounded, and who hides the vanquished, the good goddess of poverty. Thou art all gentleness, all patience, all strength, and all mercy, O good goddess. It is thou who unitest all thy children in holy love, and who givest to them charity, faith, hope, O goddess of poverty. Thy children will one day cease to bear the world upon their shoulders. They will be rewarded for their sufferings and their labors. The time approaches when they will no longer be either rich or poor, when all men will consume the fruits of the earth and enjoy equally the gifts of God. But thou wilt not be forgotten in their hymns, O good goddess of poverty. They will remember that thou wast their fruitful mother, their robust nurse, and their church militant. They will pour balm upon thy wounds, and they will make for thee of the rejuvenated and perfumed earth a bed on which thou canst at last repose, O good goddess of poverty. While awaiting the day of the Lord, torrents and forests, mountains and valleys, heaths swarming with little flowers and little birds, roads sanded with gold which have no master. Let pass the goddess, the good goddess of poverty. End of Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 1. Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Countess of Rudolstadt by George Sand, translated by Francis G. Shaw. Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 2. Imagine to yourself this ballad, given in beautiful verses, in a sweet and simple language, which seems to have been made for the lips of youth. Adapted to a melody which moves the heart and draws from it the purest tears, a seraphic voice which sings with an exquisite purity, an incomparable musical accent. And all this in the mouth of the son of Trismegistus, the pupil of the czandra, of the most beautiful, the most candid, and the best endowed of the children of earth. If you can represent to yourself, as a frame, a vast group of manly, ingenuous, and picturesque figures in the midst of one of Rysdale's landscapes, and the torrent which was not seen, but which sent, from the bottom of the ravine as it were, a fresh melody mingled with the far-off tinkling bells of the goats on the mountain, you will conceive our emotion and the ineffable poetic delight in which we remained for a long time plunged. Now, my children, said Albert Potebrad to the villagers, we have prayed, it is time to labor. Go to the fields. As for myself, I go with my family to seek life and inspiration through the forest. You will return this evening, cried all the peasants. The czandra made a sign of affection, which they took for a promise. The two little girls, who understood nothing of the course of time or the chances of their journey, cried out, "Yes, yes," with an infantile joy, and the peasants dispersed. Old Zdenko seated himself upon the threshold of the hut, when he had seen, with a paternal air, that his godson's bag was provided with the family breakfast. Then the czandra made us a sign to follow, and we left the village in the suite of our wandering musicians. We had to ascend the slope of the ravine. The master and myself each took one of the little girls in our arms, and this gave us an opportunity to join Trismegistus, who, until then, had not seemed to notice our presence. "You see me rather absent," said he to me. "I am sorry to deceive the friends whom we leave, and that old man whom I love, and who will seek for us tomorrow in all the paths of the forest. But Consuelo has willed it so," added he, pointing to his wife. "She thinks that there is danger for us in remaining longer here. I cannot imagine that we can henceforth occasion fear or envy to anyone. Who would understand our happiness? But she assures me that we draw the same danger upon the heads of our friends, and though I know not how, I yield to this consideration. Moreover, her will has always been my will, as mine has always been hers. We shall not return to the hamlet this evening. If you are our friends, as you appear to be, you will return at night, when you have walked far enough, and will explain this to them. We did not bid them farewell, because we did not wish to afflict them. But you will tell them that we shall return. As to Zdenko, you have only to say to him, 'Tomorrow.' His foresight extends no further. Every day, the whole of life, is for him tomorrow. He has cast off the error of human notions. He has his eyes opened upon eternity, into the mystery of which he is ready to be absorbed, in order there to resume the youth of life. Zdenko is a wise man, the wisest man I have ever known." The kind of insanity with which Trismegistus was affected produced upon his wife and children an effect worthy of remark. Far from blushing at it before us, far from suffering at it for themselves, They listened to each of his words with respect, and seemed to find in his oracles strength to raise themselves above the present life and above themselves. I believe that noble youth, who eagerly caught every thought of his father, would have been much astonished and highly indignant had he been told that they were the thoughts of a madman. Trismegistus spoke rarely, and we noticed that neither his wife nor children urged him to it without an absolute necessity. They religiously respected the mystery of his reverie, and though the czandra kept her eyes constantly fixed upon him, she seemed to fear for him rather the inconveniences than the ennui of the isolation in which he was placed. She had studied his eccentricity, and I use this word in order not again to employ that of insanity, which is still more repugnant to me when referring to such a man and to so respectable and so touching a state of mind. I have understood, from seeing this Trismegistus, the veneration which the peasants, great theologians and great metaphysicians without knowing it, and the people of the East bear towards men deprived of what is called the light of reason. They know that, when this abstraction of the understanding is not troubled by vain efforts and cruel mockeries, it may become an exceptional faculty of the most poetically divine character, instead of turning into fury or brutishness. I do not know what would become of Trismegistus if his family did not interpose as a rampart of love and fidelity between the world and him. But should he, in that case, sink under his delirium, it would be an additional proof of the respect and care which is due to those diseased in his manner, and to all the diseased of whatever nature. This family walked with an ease and an agility which would soon have exhausted our strength. The little ones themselves, if they had not been saved from fatigue, by being carried, would have devoured space. One would say that they felt born to walk, as the fish to swim. The czandra does not wish her son to take the little girls in his arms, in spite of his good intentions, so long as he has not completed his growth, and his voice has not undergone the crisis which singers call the change. She raises upon her strong shoulders those supple and confiding creatures, and carries them as lightly as she does her guitar. Physical strength is one of the benefits of this nomadic life, which becomes a passion with the poor artist, as with the beggar or the naturalist. We were much fatigued when, through the roughest paths, we reached a wild and romantic spot called the Schreckenstein. We remarked, as we approached the spot, that Consuelo looked at her husband with more earnestness, and walked nearer to him, as if she feared some danger or some terrible emotion. Still nothing disturbed the serenity of the artist. He seated himself upon a stone which tops a barren hill. There is something frightful in this place. The rocks are heaped up in disorder, and continually break the trees by their fall. Those trees which have resisted have their roots above the soil, and seem to hold by those knotty members to the rock which they threaten to drag away. A death-like silence reigns over this chaos. The herdsmen and woodcutters keep at a distance from it with terror, and the soil is dug up by wild boars. The sand bears the footmarks of the wolf and the chamois, as if the wild animals were sure of their finding a refuge against man. Albert dreamed a long while upon that stone. Then he directed his glance to his children, who played at his feet, and to his wife, who, standing before him, tried to read upon his brow. Suddenly he rose, knelt before her, and gathering his children by a gesture, "Prostrate yourselves before your mother," said he to them, with profound emotion, "for she is the consolation sent from heaven to unfortunate men. She is the peace of the Lord promised to men of good will." The children knelt around the czandra and wept as they covered her with caresses. She wept also as she pressed them to her bosom, and compelling them to turn, made them render the same homage to their father. Spartacus and myself had prostrated ourselves with them. When the czandra had spoken, the master yielded his homage to Trismegistus, and seized the moment to appeal to him with eloquence, to ask light of him, relating all that he had studied, all that he had meditated and suffered to receive it. For myself, I remained enchanted at the feet of the czandra. I hardly dare tell you what passed in me. This woman might be my mother, without doubt. Well, I know not what charm still emanates from her. In spite of the respect I feel for her husband, in spite of the terror with which the sole idea of forgetting him would have transfixed me at that moment, I felt my whole soul rush towards her with an enthusiasm which neither the splendor of youth nor the fascinations of luxury have ever inspired in me. Oh, could I find a woman like this czandra, that I might consecrate my days to her. But I do not hope it, and now that I shall never see her again, there is at the bottom of my heart a kind of despair, as if it had been revealed to me that there is no other woman for me to love upon the earth. The czandra did not even see me. She listened to Spartacus. She was struck by his ardent and sincere language. Trismegistus also was penetrated by it. He clasped his hand, and making him take a seat beside him on the stone of the Schreckenstein, "Young man," said he to him, "you have awakened in me all the recollections of my life. I thought I heard myself speak at your age, when I ardently asked for the science of virtue from men ripened by years and experience. I had determined to say nothing to you. I mistrusted, not your intelligence and your probity, but the simplicity and the fire of your heart. I did not feel myself capable, moreover, of retranscribing in a language which I formerly spoke the thoughts I have since been accustomed to manifest by the poetry of art, by feeling. Your faith has conquered. It has produced a miracle. I feel that I ought to speak to you. Yes," added he, after having examined him in silence during an instant which appeared to us an age, for we trembled lest this inspiration should desert him. "Yes, I recognize you now. I remember you. I have seen you. I have loved you. I have labored with you in some phase of my anterior life. Your name was great among men, but I have not retained it. I remember only your look, your words, and that soul from which mine separated itself with difficulty. I read better in the future than in the past now, and future ages often appear to me as glittering with light as do the days which remain to me of life under this present form. Now, I tell you, you will be great also in this age, and you will do great things. You will be blamed, accused, calumniated, hated, disgraced, persecuted, exiled. But your idea will survive you under other forms, and you will have agitated present things with a formidable plan, with immense conceptions, which the world will not forget, and which will perhaps give the last blows to social and religious despotism. Yes, you have reason to seek for action upon society. You obey your destiny. That is your inspiration. This enlightens me. What I have felt when listening to you, what you have communicated to me of your hope, is a great proof of the reality of your mission. Forward, then, act and labor. Heaven has made you the organizer of destruction. Destroy and dissolve. That is your work. Faith is needed to pull down as well as to build up. For myself, I voluntarily withdrew from the paths in which you rush forward. I considered them evil. Doubtless they were only accidentally so. If true servants of the cause feel called to attempt them again, it is because they have again become practicable. I thought there was nothing to be hoped for from actual society, and that no one could reform it by remaining in it. I placed myself outside of it, and, despairing to see salvation descend upon the people from the height of that corruption. I have consecrated the last years of my strength to act directly upon the people. I have addressed myself to the poor, to the weak, to the oppressed, and have brought to them my preaching under the forms of art and poetry, which they understand because they love them. It is possible that I have too much distrusted the good instincts which still palpitate in men of science and power. I no longer know them, since, repelled by their impious skepticism and their still more impious superstition, I withdrew from them with disgust, to seek the simple in heart. It is probable that they must have changed, have been corrected and taught. What do I say? It is certain that this world has advanced, that it has purified itself, that it has become greater during 15 years, for everything human gravitates incessantly towards the light, and all is bound together, the good and the evil, to rush towards the divine ideal. You wish to address yourself to the world of the learned, the patricians and the rich. You wish to level by persuasion. You wish to seduce even kings, princes, and prelates by the charms of truth. You feel gush up within you that confidence and that strength which surmount all obstacles and renew the youth of all that is old and worn out. Obey the breath of the Spirit. Continue and aggrandize our work. Gather our arms scattered on the field of battle where we were vanquished. Then began a conversation between Spartacus and the divine old man, a conversation which I shall never forget in my life. For a marvelous occurrence took place. This Rudolstadt, who was at first willing to speak with us only by the sounds of music, as formerly did Orpheus, this artist, who told us that he had long since abandoned logic and pure reason for pure feeling, this man, whom infamous judges called insane, and who consented to pass as such, making as it were a sublime effort from charity and divine love, suddenly became the most reasonable of philosophers, so far as to guide us in the path of the true method and of certainty. Spartacus, on his side, showed all the ardor of his soul. The one was the complete man, all whose faculties are in unison. The other was like a neophyte, full of enthusiasm. I called to memory the gospel, in which it is said that Jesus conversed on the mountain with Moses and the prophets. Yes, said Spartacus, I feel that I have a mission. I have approached those who govern the earth and have been struck by their stupidity, their ignorance, and their hardness of heart. Oh, how beautiful is nature! How beautiful is life! How beautiful is humanity! But what do they do with nature, with life, with humanity? And I wept a long while on seeing both myself and the men my brothers and the whole divine work, the slaves of such wretches. And when I had groaned a long while like a weak woman, I said to myself, what prevents my tearing myself from their chains and living free? But after a phase of solitary stoicism, I saw that to be free alone is not to be free. Man cannot live alone. Man has man for his object. He cannot live without his necessary object. And I said to myself, I am still a slave. Let me deliver my brothers. And I have found noble hearts who have associated themselves with me, and my friends call me Spartacus. I had indeed told you that you would only destroy, replied the old man. Spartacus was a revolted slave, but no matter. Once again, organized to destroy. Let a secret society be formed at your call to destroy the existing form of the great iniquity. But if you wish to be strong, efficacious, powerful, introduce the most you can of living, eternal principles into that society destined to destroy, in order that it may at first destroy, for to destroy it must be, all life is positive. and that afterwards from the work of destruction may be born that which should be born. I understand you. You limit my mission very much. However small or great, I accept it. All that is in the designs of God is great. No one thing that should be the rule of your soul. Nothing is lost. Though your name and the form of your works disappear, though you labor without a name, like myself, your work will not be lost. The divine balance is mathematics itself, and in the crucible of the divine chemist, all the atoms are counted at their exact value. Since, then, you approve my designs, teach me, open to me the root. What must be done? How must I act upon men? Is it especially upon the imagination that I must operate? Must I profit by their weakness and their inclination for the marvelous? You have yourself seen that good can be done with the marvelous. Yes, but I have also seen all the evil that can be done. If you are well acquainted with the doctrine, you will know in what epoch of humanity we live, and you will conform your means of action to your time. Teach me then the doctrine. Teach me the method of acting. Show me certainty. You ask method and certainty from an artist, from a man whom men have accused of madness and persecuted under that pretext. It seems that you are in error. Ask of the philosophers, of the wise man. It is of you that I ask. I know the value of their science. Well, since you insist, I will tell you that the method is identical with the doctrine itself, because it is identical with the supreme truth revealed in the doctrine, and on thinking of it, you will understand that it cannot be otherwise. All is therefore reduced to a knowledge of the doctrine. Spartacus reflected, and after a moment's silence said, I wish to hear from your mouth the sublime formula of the doctrine. You will hear it, not from my mouth, but from that of Pythagoras, himself the echo of all the sages. O divine tetrad! That is the formula. It is that which, under all kinds of images, of symbols and emblems, humanity has proclaimed by the voice of the great religions, when she has not been able to seize it in a purely spiritual manner, without incarnation, without idolatry, such as has been given to the revealers to reveal it to themselves. Speak, speak, and to make yourself understood, recall to me some of those emblems. Afterwards you will use the austere language of the Absolute. I cannot separate, as you would wish, these two things, religion in itself, in its essence, and manifested religion. It belongs to human nature in our epoch to see both together. We judge the past, and, without living in it, we find in it the confirmation of our ideas. But I will make myself understood. Come, let us talk. Let us talk first about God. Does the formula apply to God, to the infinite essence? It would be faulty did it not apply to him from whom it flows. Have you reflected upon the nature of God? Without doubt, for I feel that you carry heaven, the true heaven, in your heart. Well, what is God? He is being. He is absolute being. Sum qui sum, says the great book, the Bible. Yes, but do we know nothing more of his nature? Has not God revealed to humanity something more? The Christians say that God is three persons in one, the Father, the Son, the Spirit. And what say the traditions of the ancient secret societies which you have consulted? They say the same thing. Has not this coincidence struck you? Public and triumphant religion, secret and proscribed religion, agree respecting the nature of God. I might speak to you of the worships anterior to Christianity. You would find the same truth hidden in their theology. India, Egypt, Greece, have known the one God in three persons. But we will return to this point. What I wish to make you understand now is the formula in its whole extent, under all its aspects, in order to arrive at what interests you: the method, the organization, the polity. I continue. From God, let us pass to man. What is man? After a difficult question, you ask me another which is not less so. The oracle of Delphos declared that all wisdom consisted in the answer to this question: Man, know thyself. And the oracle was right. It is from the human nature well understood that issues all wisdom, as well as all morals, all organization, all true polity. Permit me, therefore, to repeat my question to you. What is man? Man is an emanation from God, without doubt, as are all the creatures that live, since God alone is being, absolute being. But you do not resemble, I hope, the philosophers whom I have seen in England, in France, and also in Germany, at the court of Frederick. You do not resemble that Locke, of whom so much is said nowadays on the faith of his commentator Voltaire. You do not resemble Monsieur Helvetius, with whom I have often conversed, nor Lemaitre, whose bold materialism so much pleased the court of Berlin. You do not say, like them, that there is nothing peculiar in man to distinguish him from the animals, the trees, the stones. God, doubtless, makes all nature live, as he makes man live. But there is order in his theodicy. There are distinctions in his thought and consequently in his works, which are his thought realized. Read the great book that is called Genesis, that book which the common people rightly look upon as sacred without understanding it. You will there see that it is by divine light establishing the distinction of beings that the eternal creation is made. Fiat lux et facta, est lux. You will there see also that each being having a name in the divine thought is a species. Creavit cuncta juxta, genus suum et secundum speciem suum. What then is the peculiar formula of man? I understand you. You wish to give me a formula of man analogous to that of God. The divine Trinity must be found in all the works of God. Each work of God must reflect the divine nature, but in a special manner, each, in a word, according to its species. Certainly, I will tell you the formula of man. It will be a long while before the philosophers, now divided in their manner of seeing, will unite to comprehend it. Still there was one who comprehended it, already many years since. He is greater than the others, although he is infinitely less celebrated among the vulgar. While the school of Descartes loses itself in pure reason, making man a machine of reasoning, of syllogisms, an instrument of logic, while Locke and his school lose themselves in sensation, making man a sensitive plant, while others, such as I could cite in Germany, are absorbed in sentiment, making man a selfishness for two, if referring to love, for three or four and even more, if referring to the family. He, the greatest of all, began to understand that man was all this in one, all this indivisibly. That philosopher was Leibniz. He understood great things. He did not share the absurd contempt which our ignorant age feels for antiquity and Christianity. He dared to say that there were pearls in the dunghill of the Middle Ages. Pearls, I think so indeed. Truth is eternal, and all the prophets have received it. I therefore say to you with him, and with an affirmation stronger than his, that man is a trinity like God, and that this trinity is called in human language sensation, sentiment, knowledge. And the unity of these three things makes the human tetrad, corresponding to the divine tetrad. Thence comes all history, thence comes all polity, and it is thence that you must draw, as from an always living spring. You pass abysses which my mind, less rapid than yours, cannot pass so quickly, replied Spartacus. How, from the psychological definition you have just given me, does there proceed a method, a rule of certainty? This is what I first ask of you. That method easily proceeds from it, returned Rudolstadt. Human nature being known, the question is to cultivate it according to its essence. If you understood that unrivaled book from which the gospel itself is derived, if you understood the Genesis attributed to Moses, and which, if it really comes from that prophet, was brought by him from the temples of Memphis, you would know that the human dissolution, or that which the Genesis calls the deluge, has no other cause than the separation of these three faculties of human nature, departing thus from unity, and therefore from connection with the divine unity, in which intelligence, love, and activity remain eternally associated. You will then understand how every organizer must imitate Noah, the regenerator, and what the scripture calls the generations of Noah, with the order in which it places them and the harmony it establishes between them, will serve you as a guide. You would find also at the same time, in metaphysical truth, a method of certainty to cultivate worthily the human nature in each man, and a light to enlighten you respecting the true organization of societies. But I tell you once again, I do not think the present time made for organizing. There is too much to destroy. It is especially as method that I recommend you to attach yourself to the doctrine. The time of dissolution approaches, or rather it has already come. Yes, the time has come in which the three faculties of human nature will anew be separated, and in which their separation will occasion death to the social, religious, and political body. What will happen? Sensation will produce its false prophets, and they will extol sensation. Sentiment will produce its false prophets, and they will extol sentiment. Knowledge will produce its false prophets, and they will extol intelligence. These last will be the proud who will resemble Satan. The second will be fanatics ready to fall into evil as well as to advance to good, without sure criterion and without rule. The others will be what Homer says, the companions of Ulysses became under the wand of Circe. Follow neither of these three routes which, taken separately, lead to abysses, one to materialism, the second to mysticism, the third to atheism. There is but one sure road to truth. It is that which corresponds to complete nature, to human nature developed unto all its aspects. Do not leave that road, and for that purpose meditate unceasingly upon the doctrine and its sublime formula. You teach me things which I before had a glimpse of, but tomorrow I shall no longer have you. Who will guide me in the theoretic knowledge of truth, and thence in practice? You will have other sure guides. Above all, read the Genesis, and endeavor to seize its meaning. Do not take it as a book of history, as a monument of chronology. There is nothing so void of sense as this opinion, which, nevertheless, prevails everywhere with the learned as well as with scholars, and in all Christian communions. Read the Gospel with reference to the Genesis, and understand it by means of the Genesis, after having received it into your heart. Strange fact! The Gospel is, like the Genesis, adored and misunderstood. These are great things, but there are still others. Collect piously what remains to us of Pythagoras. Read also the writings presented unto the name of the divine Theosophist, whose name I bore in the temple. Do not believe, my friends, that I would have of myself dared to assume that venerated name of Trismegistus. It was the invisibles who commanded me to bear it. Those writings of Hermes, nowadays disdained by the pedants, who foolishly believe them to be the invention of some Christian of the 2nd or 3rd century, contain the ancient Egyptian science. A day will come in which, explained and brought to light, they will appear what they are, monuments more precious than those of Plato, for Plato derived his science from them, and it must be added that he has strangely misconceived and falsified the truth in his Republic. Read, therefore, Trismegistus and Plato, and those who since their time have meditated upon the great mystery. Among this number, I recommend to you the noble monk Campanella, who suffered horrible tortures for having dreamed what you dream of, human organization based upon truth and science. We listened in silence. When I speak to you of books, continued Trismegistus, do not believe that, like the Catholics, I idolatrously incarnate life in the tombs. I will say to you of books what I said yesterday of other monuments of the past. Books, monuments, are the remains of life by which life may and should be nourished. But life is always present, and the eternal Trinity is better engraved in us and on the face of the stars than in the books of Plato or Hermes. Without intending it, I somewhat by chance turned the conversation. Master, said I to him, you have just expressed yourself thus. The Trinity is better engraved on the face of the stars. What do you mean by that? I see indeed, as the Bible says, the glory of God shine out in the brightness of the stars. But I do not see in those stars a proof of the general law of life, which you call Trinity. The reason is, he replied, that physical sciences are still insufficiently advanced, or rather, that you have not studied them at the point where they now are. Have you heard of the discoveries in electricity? Doubtless, for they have drawn the attention of all educated men. Well, have you not remarked that the savants, who are so incredulous, so contemptuous, when reference is made to the divine Trinity, have come, with regard to those phenomena, to recognize the Trinity? But they themselves say that there is no electricity without heat and light, and reciprocally. In a word, they there see 3 in 1, which they are not willing to admit in God. He then began to speak to us of nature, and of the necessity of referring all its phenomena to one general law. Life, said he, is one. There is but one act of life. The sole question is to understand how all particular beings live by the grace and intervention of the universal being, without, on that account, being absorbed in him. I should have been delighted on my own account to have heard him develop this great subject, but for some time past Spartacus had appeared to give less attention to his words. It was not that he did not take an interest in them, but the tension of the old man's mind would not last always, and he wished to improve it by bringing him back to his favorite subject. Rudolstadt perceived this kind of impatience. You no longer follow me, said he to him. Does the science of nature appear to you inapproachable in the manner in which I understand it? If you think so, you are mistaken. I place as much value as you do upon the present labors of savants, turned entirely to experiments. But by continuing in this direction, they will not form science. They will form only nomenclatures. I am not, moreover, the only one who believes this. I knew in France a philosopher whom I loved much, Diderot, who often cried out, respecting the heaping up of scientific materials without a general idea. This is at most the work of a stone-cutter, but I see neither edifice nor architect. Know then that, sooner or later, the doctrine will have to do with the natural sciences. We must build with those stones, and then, Do you believe that the natural philosophers can nowadays really understand nature? Despoiled by them of the living God who fills it? Can they feel it, know it? For example, they take light for matter, sound for matter, when it is light and sound. Ah, cried Spartacus, interrupting him, do not think that I repel your intuitions respecting nature. No, I feel that there can be no true science but by the knowledge of the divine unity and of the perfect similitude of all phenomena. But you open to us all the paths, and I tremble at the thought that you will soon be silent. I could wish that you would enable me to take some steps forward in one of those paths. Which? Asked Rudolstadt. It is the future of humanity I think of. I understand. You would wish me to give you my utopia, returned the old man, smiling. That is what I came to ask of you, said Spartacus. Your utopia, the new society which you bear in your brain and in your bosom. We know that the society of the invisibles sought for and dreamed of its basis. All that labor has ripened in you. Let us profit by it. Give us your republic. We will attempt it, so far as it appears realizable to us, and the sparks from your altar will begin to move the world. Children, you ask of me my dreams, replied the philosopher. Well, I will try to raise a corner of the veil which so often conceals from me the future. It will perhaps be for the last time, but I ought to attempt it today, for I have faith that with you all will not be lost in the golden visions of poetry. End of Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 2. Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg. Part 3, from the Countess of Rudolstadt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Countess of Rudolstadt by George Sand, translated by Francis G. Shaw. Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 3. Then Trismegistus entered into a kind of divine transport. His eyes shone like stars, and his voice bowed us like the hurricane. During more than 4 hours he spoke, and his speech was beautiful and pure as a sacred hymn. From the religious, political, and artistic work of all the ages, he composed the most magnificent poem that can be conceived. He interpreted all the religions of the past, all the mysteries of the temples, of the poems, and of the legislations, all the efforts, all the tendencies, all the labors of anterior humanity. In those things which had always seemed to us dead or condemned, he discovered the elements of life, and from the darkness of the very fables, he made to shine the lightnings of truth. He explained the ancient myths. He established in his lucid and ingenious demonstration all the bonds, all the points of contact of the religions among themselves. He showed us the true requirements of humanity, more or less understood by the legislators, more or less realized by the people. He reconstituted before our eyes the unity of life in humanity, the unity of doctrine in religion, and from all the materials scattered in the old and new world, he formed the basis of his future world. At last he caused to disappear the doubts of continuity, which had so long stopped us in our studies. He filled up the abysses of history, which had so terrified us. He unrolled in a single infinite spiral the myriads of consecrated bandages which enveloped the mummy of science. And when we had received with the quickness of the flash what he showed to us with the rapidity of lightning, when we had seized the aggregate of his vision, and the past, father of the present, stood before us like the luminous man of the apocalypse. He stopped and said to us with a smile, "Now you comprehend the past and the present. Is there any necessity for me to show to you the future? Does not the Holy Spirit shine before your eyes? Do you not see that all which man has dreamed and desired of sublime is possible and certain in the future? For the simple reason that truth is eternal and absolute, in spite of the weakness of our organs to conceive and possess it. And yet, we all possess it by hope and by desire. It lives in us. It exists from all time in humanity, in the state of germ, awaiting the supreme fecundation. I tell you in truth, we gravitate towards the ideal, and this gravitation is infinite as the ideal itself." He spoke again, and his poem of the future was as magnificent as that of the past. I will not try to translate it for you here. I should spoil it, and one must be oneself under the influence of inspiration in order to transmit what inspiration has uttered. I shall perhaps require 2 or 3 years of meditation to write worthily what Trismegistus told us in 2 or 3 hours. The work of the life of Socrates was the work of the life of Plato, and that of Jesus has been that of 17 centuries. You see that I, unfortunate and unworthy, must shudder at the idea of my task. Still, I do not give it up. The master does not embarrass himself with this transcribing, such as I wish to make it. A man of action, he has already drawn up a code which contains, from his point of view, the whole doctrine of Trismegistus, with as much clearness and precision as if he had himself studied and examined it all his life. He has assimilated, as by an electric contact, all the intelligence, all the soul of the philosopher. He possesses it. He is master of it. He will make use of it as a politician. He will be the living and immediate translation, instead of the tardy and dead letter which I propose. And before I have accomplished my work, he will have transmitted the doctrine to his school. Yes, perhaps before 2 years. The strange and mysterious words which have been uttered in this mountain will have cast their roots among numerous adepts, and we shall see that vast subterranean world of secret societies, which now moves in darkness, unite under a single doctrine, receive a new legislation, and recover its action by being initiated into the word of life. We bring to you this so desired monument, which confirms the foresight of Spartacus, which sanctions the truths already attained by him, and which enlarges his horizon with all the strength of an inspired faith. While Trismegistus spoke, and I listened greedily, fearing to lose the sound of those words which produced on me the effect of a sacred hymn. Spartacus, master of himself in his exaltation, his eye on fire, but his hand firm, and his mind still more open than his ear, was rapidly tracing upon his tablets signs and figures, as if the metaphysical conception of this doctrine had been presented to him under the forms of geometry. When, that very evening, he recurred to those strange notes, which had no meaning in my eyes, I was surprised to see him use them to write down and put in order, with incredible precision, the deductions of the poetical logic of the philosopher. All was simplified and summed up as if by magic in that mysterious alembic of our master's practical understanding. Footnote: It is known that Weishaupt, eminently an organizer, used material signs to sum up his system, and that he sent to his distant disciples his whole theory represented by circles and lines on a small square of paper. Still, he was not yet satisfied. Trismegistus seemed abandoned by his inspiration. His eyes lost their brightness, his body seemed to sink, and the Zingara made a sign to us not to interrogate him any further. Yet, ardent in the pursuit of truth, Spartacus did not listen to her, but pressed the poet with imperious questions. "You have depicted to me the kingdom of God upon the earth," said he to him, shaking his chilled hand. "But Jesus has said, 'My kingdom is not yet of this time.' For 17 centuries, humanity awaits in vain the realization of his promises. I have not been raised to the same height as yourself in the contemplation of eternity. Time presents to you, as to God himself, the spectacle or the idea of a permanent activity, all the phases of which reply at all times to your exalted feeling. As to myself, I live nearer to the earth. I count centuries and years. I wish to read in my own life. Tell me, prophet, what I have to do in this phase in which you see me, what your words have effected in me, and what they will effect in the age which commences. I do not wish to have passed through it in vain." "What matters it to you, that which I know?" replied the poet. "No one lives in vain. Nothing is lost. No one of us is useless. Let me turn my eyes from that detail which saddens the heart and contracts the mind. I am overpowered with fatigue at having thought of it a moment." "Revealer, you have no right to yield to exhaustion," resumed Spartacus, with energy, endeavoring to communicate the fire of his glance to the vague and already dreamy eye of the poet. "If you turn away your sight from the spectacle of human misery, you are not the real man, the complete man, of whom an ancient said, 'Homo sum et nihil humani a me alieno puto.' No, you do not love men. You are not their brother. If you are not interested in the evils which they suffer at every hour of eternity, and if you do not seek the remedy in the speedy application of your ideal, O unhappy artist, who does not feel a devouring fire consume him in this terrible and delightful search?" "What then do you ask of me?" returned the poet, moved and almost irritated in his turn. "Have you then the pride to think yourself the sole workman? And do you believe that I attribute to myself the honor of being the only inspirer? I am not a diviner. I despise false prophets, and have for a long time contended against them. My predictions are reasonings. My visions are perceptions elevated to their highest power. The poet is quite other than the sorcerer. He dreams with certainty, while the other invents at random. I believe in your action because I feel the contact of your power. I believe in the sublimity of my dreams because I feel myself capable of producing them, and because humanity is great enough and generous enough to realize 100-fold and in mass whatever one of its members has been able to conceive alone." "Well," said Spartacus, "it is the destiny of that humanity which I ask from you, in the name of the humanity which also stirs in my bosom, and which I bear in me with more anxiety and perhaps more love than yourself. An enchanting dream veils from you its sufferings, and I touch them, shuddering at every hour of my life. I thirst to appease them, and, like a physician at the bedside of an expiring friend, I would rather kill him by imprudence than let him die without assistance. You see, I am a dangerous man, a monster perhaps, if you do not make of me a saint. Tremble for the dying man, if you do not put the remedy into the hands of the enthusiast. Humanity dreams, sings and prays in you. In me it suffers, cries, and laments. You have opened to me your future. But your future is far off, whatever you may say, and it will cost me much sweat to extract some drops of your dictamen for the wounds which are now bleeding. Whole generations languish and perish without light and without action. I, incarnate suffering humanity, I, the cry of distress and the desire of salvation. I wish to know if my action will be fatal or beneficent. You have not so turned your eyes from the evil as to not know that it exists. Whither must we run first? What must be done tomorrow? Is it by gentleness? Is it by violence that we must combat the enemies of good? Remember your dear Taborites. They saw a sea of blood and of tears to be crossed before entering the terrestrial paradise. I do not take you for a diviner, but through your symbols I see a powerful logic and a magnificent clearness. If you can predict with certainty the most distant future, you can more surely pierce the veiled horizon which limits the extent of my sight. The poet appeared to be the victim of intense suffering. The sweat ran from his brow. He looked at Spartacus by turns with terror and with enthusiasm. A terrible strife oppressed him. His wife, horrified, encircled him with her arms and addressed mute reproaches to our master, by looks in which was depicted, nevertheless, a respectful fear. Never have I felt more strongly the power of Spartacus than at this moment, when he overpowered, with all his fanatic will of uprightness and of truth, the tortures of this prophet contending with inspiration, the sorrow of that suppliant woman, the terror of their children, and the reproaches of his own heart. I was myself trembling. I considered him cruel. I feared to see the beautiful soul of the poet broken in a last effort, and the tears which shone in Consuelo's eyes fell bitter and burning upon my heart. Suddenly Trismegistus rose, and, repelling both Spartacus and the Zingara, motioning to his children to remove, he appeared to us transfigured. His glance seemed to read in an invisible book, vast as the world, written in characters of light upon the vault of heaven. He cried, "Am I not man? Why should I not say what human nature demands, and what it will consequently realize? Yes, I am man. Therefore I can say what man wishes, and what he will effect. He who sees the cloud gather can predict the lightning and the hurricane. I know what is in my bosom, and what will issue from it. I am man, and am in connection with the humanity of my time. I have seen Europe, and I am acquainted with the storms which growl in her bosom. Friends, my dreams are not dreams. I swear it by human nature. Those dreams are dreams only in comparison with the present form of the world. But which has the initiative, spirit or matter? The gospel says, the Spirit bloweth where it listeth. The Spirit will blow and will change the face of the world. It is said in Genesis that the Spirit blew upon the waters when all was chaos and darkness. Now, creation is eternal. Let us create then. That is to say, let us obey the breath of the Spirit. I see the darkness and the chaos. Why should we remain in darkness? Veni Creator Spiritus. He interrupted himself and resumed thus. Is it Louis XV who can strive against you, Spartacus? Frederick, the disciple of Voltaire, is not so powerful as his master. And if I should compare Maria Theresa to my Consuelo, but what blasphemy! He interrupted himself again. Come, Zdenko, you, my son, you, the descendant of the Podobrads, and who bear the name of a slave, prepare yourself to sustain us. You are the new man. Which side will you take? Will you be with your father and mother, or with the tyrants of the world? In you is the strength, new generation. Will you confirm slavery or liberty? Son of Consuelo, son of the gypsy woman, godson of the slave, I hope that you will be with the gypsy woman and with the slave. Otherwise, I, born of kings, I renounce you." He added, "He who should dare to say that the divine essence, which is beauty, goodness, power, will not be realized upon the earth, that man is Satan." He added, moreover, "He who should dare to say that the human essence, created in the image of God, as says the Bible, and which is sensation, sentiment, knowledge, will not be realized upon the earth, that man is Cain." He remained some time mute and resumed thus: "Your strong will, Spartacus, has produced the effect of an incantation. How weak are those kings upon their thrones! They think themselves powerful, because all bend before them. They do not see that which threatens. Ah, you have cast down the nobles and their armed men, the bishops and their clergy, and you think yourselves very strong. But that which you have cast down was your strength. It is not your mistresses, your courtiers, and your abbeys who will defend you, poor monarchs, vain phantoms. Hasten to France, Spartacus. France will soon destroy. She has need of you. Hasten, I tell you, hasten, if you wish to take part in the work. France is the predestined among the nations. Unite yourself, my son, to the elders of the human race. I hear resound in France these words of Isaiah: Arise, be enlightened, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Eternal is descended upon thee, and the nations will come to thy light. The Taborites sing that of Tabor. At this day, Tabor is France." He was silent for some time. His face had become radiant with happiness. "I am happy," he cried. Glory to God in the heavens, as says the gospel, and peace upon earth to men of good will." It is the angels who sing that. I feel like the angels, and I would sing with them. What then has happened? I am still among you, my friends. I am still with thee, O my Eve, O my Consuelo. These are my children, the souls of my soul. But we are no longer in the mountains of Bohemia, upon the ruins of the chateau of my fathers. It seems to me that I breathe light and that I enjoy eternity. Who, then, of you said just now, "Oh, how beautiful is life, how beautiful is nature, how beautiful is humanity"? But he added, "The tyrants have spoiled all that." Tyrants, there are none any longer. Man is equal to man. Human nature is comprehended, recognized, sanctified. Man is free, equal, and brother. There is no longer any other definition of man. No more masters, no more slaves. Do you hear that cry? Long live the Republic. Do you hear that numberless crowd which proclaims liberty, fraternity, equality? Ah, that is the formula which, in our mysteries, was uttered in a low voice and which only the adepts of the higher grades communicated to each other. Then there is no more room for the secret. The sacraments are for all the world, the cup to all the world, as said our fathers the Hussites. But suddenly, alas, he began to weep hot tears. I knew well that the doctrine was not sufficiently advanced. There were not men enough who carried it in their heart or comprehended it in their mind. What horror, continued he. War everywhere, and such a war. He wept a long while. We knew not what visions pressed before his eyes. It seemed to us that he again saw the war of the Hussites. All his faculties appeared troubled. His soul was like that of the Christ upon Calvary. I suffered a great deal at seeing him suffer so much. Spartacus was firm as a man who consults oracles. Lord, Lord, cried the prophet, after having long wept and groaned, have pity upon us. We are in thy hands. Do with us according to thy will. As he pronounced these last words, Trismegistus extended his hands to seek those of his wife and son, as if he were instantaneously deprived of sight. The little girls came, quite frightened, to press against his heart, and they all remained intertwined in the deepest silence. The features of the Zingara expressed terror, and young Zdenko interrogated with affright the looks of his mother. Spartacus did not see them. Was the vision of the poet still before his eyes? At last he approached the group, and the Zingara made to him a sign not to arouse her husband. His eyes were opened and fixed before him, whether he was sleeping after the manner of the somnambulist, or saw slowly effaced on the horizon the dreams which had agitated him. After a quarter of an hour, he breathed deeply. His eyes became animated, and he drew to his bosom his wife and his son, whom he kept there long embraced. Then he rose and made a sign that he desired to resume his journey. "The sun is very hot for you at this hour," said Consuelo to him. "Do you not prefer to take the siesta under these trees?" "The sun is good," replied he, with an ingenuous smile, "and if you do not fear it more than usual, it will do me great good." Each resumed his burden, the father the traveling bag, the young man the instruments, and the mother the hands of her daughters. "You have made me suffer," said she to Spartacus, "but I know that we must suffer for the truth." "Do you not fear that this crisis may have evil consequences?" asked Iapher with emotion. "Let me follow you still further. I may be useful to you." "Be blessed for your charity," returned she, "but do not follow us. I fear nothing for him but a little melancholy during a few hours. But there was in this place a danger, a horrible recollection, from which you have preserved him by busying him with other thoughts. He wished to come here, and, thanks to you, he has not even recognized the place. I therefore bless you in every manner, and wish for you the opportunity and the means of serving God with all your power. I retained the children to caress them and to prolong the moments which fled, but their mother took them from me, and I felt as if abandoned by all when she bid me farewell for the last time. Trismegistus did not bid us farewell. He seemed to have forgotten us. His wife implored us not to distract him. He descended the hill with a firm step. His face was calm, and with a kind of happy gaiety, he assisted his beloved daughter to leap over the thickets and the rocks. The handsome Zdenko walked behind him with his mother and his younger sister. We followed them for a long while with our eyes upon the road sanded with gold, the road without master of the forest. At last they were lost behind the firs, and at the moment when she was about to disappear the last, we saw the Zingara raise her little Wenceslawa and place her upon her strong shoulder. Then she hastened to rejoin her dear caravan, alert as a true daughter of Bohemia, poetical as the good goddess of poverty. And we also, we are on the road. We walk forward. Life is a journey which has life for its end, and not death, as is said in a material and gross sense. We consoled as well as we could the inhabitants of the hamlet, and left old Zdenko awaiting his tomorrow. We joined our brothers at Pilsen, whence I have written to you this recital, and we are about to depart on other quests. And do you also, friend, hold yourself ready for the journey without rest, for the action without fainting. We go to triumph or to martyrdom. Footnote. Martinowicz, to whom this letter was addressed, a distinguished savant and enthusiastic illuminae, was beheaded at Buda in 1795, with several Hungarian lords, his accomplices in a conspiracy. End. End of Letter from Philon to Ignatius Joseph Martinowicz, Professor of Physics at the University of Lemberg, Part 3. End of The Countess of Rudolstadt.